3 words to describe that race: slippery when wet. The Turkish Grand Prix delivered everything it had to. It was exciting. Everyone was going everywhere. It was a good race. And the interesting thing about it, which I talk a little bit about later on, is that this race will never be replicated. Because one of the reasons this race was like it was because the tarmac had very recently, 10 days before the race, been replaced, which means there wasn't a lot of rubber on there. There wasn't a lot of anything on there. It was a really, really green track, more so than you normally get. Green meaning not a lot's down there, no rubber, no other running, no anything, but it was a really green track, more so than ever. And when the rain fell, there was no grip anyway, but with the rain, there was definitely no grip. One of the most exciting races I think we've had all season. The possibility of anyone being able to win it was true until maybe the last 20 laps of the race. Really good race all round, and I think it did a good showing for the track. I'm not sure about the overtaking potential of the track. It was very difficult to tell because the track was so wet, and even when it was dry, so slippery, it was very difficult to tell how easy or hard it would have been for the cars to overtake. The most surprising thing, genuinely, for me, was that Lewis Hamilton won this race. Starting from 6th, he managed to win this race. I did not think that was possible, and not taking any credit away because it was a very good drive from him, but I do think that the weather played into his hands. The longer they ran the intermediates, the more like slick tyres they became, and because we had no additional rain, there was no need to have fresh inters or full wet tyres on the cars towards the end. It was almost slick tyre weather. For anyone who doesn't know, slick tyres are grooveless, so they are completely flat, and they are the tyres that the Formula 1 cars usually run. Intermediates are slightly grooved, but not as deeply grooved as the full wets. The intermediates and the full wets are wet weather tyres. They give more grip and purchase to the drivers on a wet track, and also can shift standing water from the track. The intermediates clear about 35 litres per second, and the full wets about 84 litres a second. I honestly thought Hamilton's tyres were going to go off in the last 20 laps. When it got to, I think he was on lap 35 or something, and he had about 25 left to go on 34 lap old inters already, and they were obviously predicting the rain, and even he came on the radio towards the end and said, if it rains, we are toast, because these tyres have nothing left in them. And it's basically because they were then burnt down to slicks. The more you run the tyres, the more you run away the rubber, and on intermediate tyres, that means they're just losing that groove because you're burning away the groove, and then they become slick tyres. I think this worked out for him because the track was nearly at slick tyres anyway. I think someone could have and should have risked it. I think there was just there, but there were a couple of corners. I think the first corner and the last corner just had a lot of standing water that wasn't being shifted. And as soon as you went offline as well, there was a lot of water still down on the track. So that's why people weren't changing onto the slick tyres. But I do think we were almost there at the end of the race, which is why I think the slick intermediates, as people were calling them, worked out for Hamilton and aided him to drive to victory to claim his 7th World Championship. Massive congratulations to him. Good race from him. I was absolutely shocked he made it to the end on those tyres, but on reflection, I can understand why and how that worked out for him. Moving on to talk about Racing Point, as indicated by the hat. What a bit of a weekend they have. I do have to slightly retract some of my past statements about Lance Stroll. I won't deny that I still believe he is in the team he's in, and having the opportunities he has because his father owns the team. However, before you sound off in the comments, I have to give it to him this weekend. He did an absolutely fantastic job in not easy conditions. Qualifying on pole, Racing Point got that right. They were on the intermediates at the right time. Had Red Bull come straight out into Q3 on the intermediates, I do think Max Verstappen would have taken pole position. He had the feel for that car. He had the vibe. He was blitzing everybody on the full wets. He was making them all look like they were on full wets, and he was on slicks during the beginning part of that qualifying. It was an absolutely staggering job by Verstappen. But I think Red Bull played the safe card, didn't quite come onto the inters quick enough. If they'd have come out of the gates on the inters like Racing Point did, I do think Verstappen would have got pole, because when they did come out on the inters, firstly, Verstappen got stuck in a little bit of traffic, and secondly, he had to give it a couple of laps to warm those inters up, and he didn't quite have enough time left in the session. That's why it played a little bit to Racing Point's hand. Their strategist is on a whole nother level. That was an amazing call from them. Really good job by the Racing Point team, but also a very good job to Lance Stroll. So not easy conditions. We saw everybody going off, especially in the race. We saw Bottas spinning every 4 corners, and Stroll never spun once. From my knowledge, please correct me if I'm wrong, during the race or qualifying. He kept it on the track in greasy, wet, difficult conditions. So a very good drive from him. We've now found out that there was some front wing damage to Stroll's car, and also getting the temperature back into those intermediates when he pit for the second time towards the end of the race. That is unfortunately why he slipped down the field. I think it was a bit of a shame for him. I think he could have ended up on the podium had that not have happened, but I think a top 5 finish would have been fitting for him. A great control he had off the start, handling the race from pole, his first ever time in a Formula 1 Grand Prix. From pole position, he did an absolutely fantastic opening stint. Let's talk about Ferrari. For once, it's with a smile on the face, because didn't they do a good job? Again, the conditions played out into their favor. We'll never know how the race would have gone in the dry. I think in the dry, it would have been Red Bull, then Mercedes, because throughout practice, Red Bull had the edge on everyone, and it looked like it was their race to win. Again, I don't think there were really, there's the straight, kinked straight, 10, 11, 12 complex. 11's the little kink in the middle. I guess that's your longest straight, but this track didn't really have any super long straights where engine power was going to be a factor. So I think that's why this is one that played to Red Bull's strengths. They perform a lot better on tracks that don't have long straights, that aren't so engine dependent, and are maybe a little bit more aero dependent. So I think this is a good track for Red Bull. It suited them quite well. But Ferrari did great utilizing those bad conditions to their favor, basically. Like I said, in a dry race, I don't think they'd have been there, starting from 12th and 14th and finishing 3rd and 4th. Absolutely amazing job by both drivers in Ferrari, especially Sebastian Vettel. He needed a good race, that's for sure, just to kind of reboost him, I think, more than anything else. But he handled that Ferrari really well in the wet, had some really good defending from other drivers on the track, some really good control over the car. I was very impressed all the way through by Vettel's performance, doing really well with a car that notably is not really designed for him, probably doesn't drive or steer the way he wants it to, because it's more designed for Charles Leclerc. So for him to have that much control and that much precision and not really make any mistakes in very difficult conditions, a very good job for him. Bit of a shame for Leclerc at the end. He'd been absolutely flying through the field every time he changed tyres, and he was on a slightly different strategy from everybody else. He pitted quite early and then came out again on the new intermediates with a phenomenal amount of pace, I might add. A very good performance from Ferrari. Do I think we'll see it again in Bahrain? No, because Bahrain's not, well, I don't expect Bahrain to be wet, and if it is, I'll be more shocked than anything. I think it played to their favour that the conditions were bad, and both of their drivers were very able to drive those cars in those bad conditions. Another great performance from Carlos Sainz, really showing his worth in that car. Both McLarens were hit with penalties after qualifying. Curious though, because I kind of remember, and please do correct me down below if I am wrong, that during the Hungarian Grand Prix 2016, it was very wet. I remember well, I was there, I was saturated. And I think Fernando Alonso went off in the first sector, and Nico Rosberg still got pole by improving when it was questioned why he was able to improve when there were yellows in the first sector. And I feel like they made a ruling after that incident that if you improve during a lap with double yellow flags, your lap gets deleted, because there's no way you can improve if you slowed enough for those double yellows. So I was really interested to find out that not a lot of cars, well, no cars got penalised for improving under yellows or double yellows. It's a curious one for me. It was a wet track, and wet tracks always improve, especially if it stops raining, which it had, so it's difficult to know, even if they did lift, if the conditions of the track were better, that the lap was just faster anyway, and they did still improve. very, very difficult one. But as I was saying, on the one hand, you've got what Kevin Magnussen said, which is if they were discovered to have not lifted and then be penalised, someone like Magnussen would have lost out on a Q2 appearance because they hadn't enforced that quick enough to get it before Q2 started. And so he may have been able to qualify higher than their position drops would have given him. But on the other hand, there's so much data to go through, and kind of like the point I just made in the fact that it was a wet session. The track was drying, therefore a lap set at the start of the session would have been much slower than a lap set at the end of the session, just because of the track evolution and the track drying out. So it's really difficult to know whether, even if they did all lift, they still just improved because the track was faster than it was when they last set their time. So a really difficult situation. I have to stand by the FIA and the race stewards that if they say nobody didn't lift through those yellow flags periods and still managed to improve, that is okay. 6th place for Verstappen in the end. Probably could have done more. I think the tyres really played out that one, and the fact that Perez and Hamilton did not pit again, and the lead that Hamilton had, 26 odd seconds, was just, no one was going to catch that, even if they'd gone onto slicks and slicks had been the right choice. I think it would have been interesting though, because if one driver had gone into slicks and made it work, I think it would have been a domino effect. And then obviously that driver would have benefited a hell of a lot from being the first on the slicks. But like I say, it was hit and miss, especially in the final corner, whether there was too much standing water or even offline for overtaking and stuff. You saw a lot of cars weaving down the straights and stuff, and that was because the inters still need to be wet to really have optimum performance, especially if they're quite burnt out inters like Hamilton's would have been. So they were basically diving offline to pick up some of that water to keep the inters a bit fresher, keep them doing what they do best rather than burn them out so fast, because if they burnt them all the way out then they would have to pit, as we saw so many of them do. Albon came 7th, which was good for him in recovery. Unfortunately, I think he had a great opportunity this weekend to show Red Bull why he should stay in that car, and unfortunately I think he squandered it. I think it's gone. I think there was a moment, I think he was running in 3rd or closing in on the podium, and all he had to do was overtake to get the position and finish on the podium, and he would have had that Red Bull seat for next year for sure. And he spun, and he made a mistake under his own volition and lost the car. And he didn't stop, he didn't break down, he didn't DNF, but I think in that moment I definitely felt that was it. That was his last chance. He's not really done enough the season through to prove to Red Bull. Now, this is not Alice's opinion. This is Alice's assumption of Red Bull's opinion based off of past experience with Red Bull. Last video, I predicted that Albon would be demoted back to AlphaTauri with Pierre Gasly, and they would race together, and that Hülkenberg would be the one to come in next to Verstappen. I definitely still agree with my prior AlphaTauri prediction. So many A's, I'm going to struggle so hard next year. However, after this weekend's performance, I still think there's somewhere on the grid for Perez. I think he's done a very good job of showing his worth, and he does bring a little bit of additional cash on the hip with him as well. So it could be Verstappen Perez? I don't know. I just don't know. All I think is that it will either be Hülkenberg or Perez next to Verstappen. That's what I'm predicting. And that's as much as I'm going to say on it. Rounding off the top 10, then we had Lando Norris in 8th. A good race from him, had a bit of difficult time. I think he was in an incident early doors from vague memory. A lot happened. At least I'm not merging this race with the last race like I did last time. But then Stroll coming in 9th, real shame for him, but the damage to the front wing and the tyres, he just couldn't reheat those second set of inters, and for him, just really made him struggle, and when he did get them up to performing, he was already too far back. And then taking the final point was Daniel Ricciardo. Not the best showing for Renault this weekend. Ricciardo just in the points, but Ocon just outside of the points, so not the best showing for them, especially when both McLarens and both Racing Points scored, and scored quite decently, at least with one of their cars, with Sainz 5th and then Perez second. So some good points coming in from them. It sees McLaren and Racing Point starting to just push a little bit further ahead of Renault in the team's manufacturers championship. I don't know what was going on with Bottas's car. Even through practice, it looked like it was struggling with the new asphalt, with the new greasy track surface. But Bottas seemed to really struggle, especially with the slippery conditions. He just couldn't get a handle on the car. Even when it was drying up, he just couldn't get a handle on the car. And Hamilton did, in fact, lap him at some point. So a really bad showing from Bottas. Speaking of the Istanbul track, or the Intercity Park track, I think it was a great circuit. I would be very interested to see it in the dry. I'd also be very interested to see it again, because if we did return, the track would be rubbered in, there'd be so much more racing that had gone on with it, and we would have a very different track to what we had last weekend. As I said before, the track was resurfaced 10 days before the racing got there because Istanbul were trying to put on a good show. They wanted to make their circuit pretty and look amazing, because I think for a while it's been a car park. So they really wanted to up the standard and be like, look what you've missed out on, F1. We're so amazing, we're so spectacular and awesome. The problem is, because I think the contract came through quite late, and then because the dreaded C word slows down everything at the moment, and they were trying to get the asphalt in to resurface the track, it only occurred and happened 10 days before the Formula 1 cars got there. And with little to no support races this weekend for F1, there wasn't really any other racing but F1 on that track, meaning that it remained slippery and greasy. But this time next year, or even, I don't know, maybe April next year, because that's the gap in the calendar we've got, it would hopefully be more rubbered in, hopefully a bit more running on it, and hopefully a little less slippy and greasy, because it's the oil of the asphalt, I think, that was rising, which is why it had that greasy sheen even when the conditions were dry. For me, Portimao and Istanbul are the two contenders, in my opinion, for that April slot. So in the 2021 calendar, which if you haven't seen the video, I did one about that a little while ago. Check that out in the card on the screen somewhere above me. Personally, I would either like to see Istanbul or Portimao fill that gap. I do also know that Malaysia is also in the mix for taking that April spot. If I'm honest, I prefer it to be Istanbul over Malaysia, because I just think it's a more interesting circuit. And can we just love turn 8? Next up, we have our final 3 races coming in a triple header: Bahrain, Abu Dhabi. We also get F2 returning as well to clean up that championship. The second Bahrain, I think, is on the Bahrain Oval. We'll see. I think that'll be quite boring, but we'll find out together. Next one up, not this weekend, but the weekend after, is the first Bahrain on the normal layout. And then we're done. What do I do after that? What do I do when the season's over? Does track talk just stop? Come on, absolutely not. We've got plenty to talk about in the off season as well, so do keep an eye on the channel for videos coming out hopefully from now all the way through till the restart of the season in March 2021. Do let me know your thoughts about the Turkish Grand Prix. Let me know your thoughts about the Istanbul circuit. Would you like to see F1 return in the future? Do you think it was only interesting because it was wet and greasy? Do you think Red Bull would have won had the conditions have been dry? I want to know all your thoughts. So let me know down in the comment section down below, and I would definitely read them and happily discuss the race, the season, F1, anything further with you there. But for now, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It's been an absolute blast as always. If you enjoyed this video, go show that like button some good old-fashioned love. And if you want to support the channel, go hit subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss next time I upload a video. Stay awesome, and I will see you all in the next video. Right, but turn 8.